wisdom traditions at their best teach you what a humble and life-giving hermeneutic is in relationship to your tradition. So you obviously will embody it and pass it on well. But that hermeneutic of the divine, where God is where we live, move, and have our being, is something we can then apply to all encounters with the other, be it aesthetic encounters or physical encounters, these kinds of things.
In this episode of Conversations in Process, Jay McDaniel is joined by the one and only Tripp Fuller. Tripp is a process theologian and host of the Homebrewed Christianity podcast, and he is also a Postdoctoral Research Fellow in Theology and Science at the University of Edinburgh. Tripp also puts on some very interesting process theological events, such as the upcoming Theology Beer Camp, The God Pods Strike Back, coming up in October of this year. And guess what? Our very own Jay McDaniel of Conversations in Process will be there. So stay tuned for that. In this conversation, Jay and Tripp venture into some more personal territory. We get to learn a bit more about Tripp's experience of his faith and understanding of music and how he brings his faith into his family life. So a bit of a different look at someone who's likely very familiar to you. Enjoy.
So let's get started. I'm curious myself. How did you get so interested in theology, and what were the formative influences on you early on, both religious and ostensibly non-religious? Music, the natural world, family, life experiences, that kind of thing. Can you get us started in that way?
Yeah. You know, I grew up in rural North Carolina most of my childhood until basically middle school. And I was a Baptist preacher's kid. And I usually tell people that meant the religious diversity I was around was the kind of Baptist you were in North Carolina. So, you know, we had the giant spectrum of free will, missionary Baptists, Southern Baptists, like, you know, that it was the variations. And it was also like I remember in elementary school when we had our first African-American student at the elementary school and the first Jewish one, and how just having them as friends occasioned questions, because my family are avid readers and things. The good question in the home turned into, well, why don't you look at this or read this and then we'll talk about it. And so the intellectual side was always encouraged. My parents had a giant library and valued education. We were the edgy Baptist in that world, you know, like women were allowed to do things at church, that kind of stuff. Like when my dad performed an interracial marriage, the Klan burned a cross on the church lawn. Like, so I always try to give those things, as most people that know me just know me after I was on the internet and you could find things. And they're like, well, he's kind of wild and crazy if you grew up in that space. But I'm like, no. That's what my neighbors were, tobacco fields and a church. But because the intellectual thing was something important to my parents, good questions got books. And then they said, then we'll talk to you about it. So the first big one religiously was fourth grade. It was Holy Week. And for those that aren't Christian, like the last week of Jesus' life leading up to Easter. And I read all four Gospels, accounts of Holy Week, and like a Baptist, made a chart about Bible, but not for foreign policy reasons, Jay. It was for like outlining what's going on. I noticed, well, Jesus says completely different things on the cross, right? In Mark, Jesus says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's out. And then you get an empty tomb and an experience of women, and they said they were scared and didn't tell anyone. But you compare that to the Gospel of John, when Jesus comes to get arrested, he's not sweating bullets. They're like, where's Jesus? And he jumps up and says, I am, echoing the name of God in the Hebrew scriptures, and they all fall down and he's in charge, right? And he gets done. He goes, well, I think I'm done now. It is finished. Right? In Luke, you get just the conversation between the two next to him. Matthew, you get zombies running around Jerusalem at the death of Jesus, right? Like these, it's not just Jesus that raised from the dead. There is, so I'm outlining this. Jesus says different things. Different people are there. What day of the Passover celebration Jesus died isn't the same. And I remember thinking to myself, not, wow, this is wild, crazy diversity is here. I thought my Bible's broken. So I called my parents and got them in there. And I'm like, look at my chart. And I remember them looking at me and go, no, it's not broken. That's what's in there. I'm like, what in the world? Who was the editor on this thing? Don't you think it would have been important to at least have a clarifying account of the death and resurrection? And I remember this conversation and them talking to me about, like, well, even things we would all talk about. Oh, that was the greatest trip when we went on spring break to Florida and saw the baseball game, went fishing and went to Disney. But if we all took our versions, it would be a little different. And now imagine years later, and everyone knows this is the most important story they're going to tell. And then so what gets attached to it? All their loves and all their ongoing experience with the divine. And then you get these stories anyway, and they're trying to, like, we know this account. That doesn't make it untrue, but the truth isn't what you're looking for, right? A seamless, harmonious, perfect, objective, settled account. And that was when I got handed a book. And I remember the cover, but I don't remember the name of it. It was some book that was kind of explaining the basics of the Gospels, composition, and history. And I didn't understand it. I just knew I wanted to. So after that, anytime I got good questions, they would come up. When we moved to Raleigh let
me stop you there. Let me stop you before.
Yeah.
So how old were you as you're telling that story? How old were you at that time?
So 10 or 11.
Okay. And, it's my experience that Baptists always know a whole lot more about the Bible than I do. I grew up a Methodist. How did you learn the Bible, and how did you think of the Bible as a very young child at age 10? Was it an inerrant text and then you were shocked, or what?
My family were the ones that got kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention during the fundamentalist takeover. So, like, I grew up thinking all truth is God's truth. They made fun of, not in front of them, fundamentalists, because they're like, that's not even what's in the Bible. Like, no, anyway, my dad's was in a church history PhD program during the takeover, and his people, all the committee got fired, for not signing things. He later finished his doctorate at Drew when I was around that age is when he was doing it. So we were not normal for rural North Carolina.
I see.
But the Bible itself for Baptists, you're right. Like, I didn't know that people could go to bed without reading the Bible and praying. I still have trouble doing it. I have to be inebriated because I just have done it my whole life. And so my primary piety is reading a sacred text and having an ongoing conversation with the living spirit of the divine. And if I do it well, it translates to how I relate to my neighbors, hopefully my enemies, and that kind of thing.
Let me get clear on that last part. So, except when you're inebriated, you do read the Bible before you go to bed, even now?
Oh, yeah.
Do you really?
Yeah, it's sitting right there on my stand. It has been redone. My parents got it redone after it died, because this has all the notes from. Well, I was a minister for 15 years and have all my degrees. So.
Well, I want to go back to the early trip, but while we're at the current trip right now, how do you read? Do you follow a lectionary, or just let the Spirit guide you, or do you have some kind of system that you follow?
I have not gotten good at a system after I was a congregational minister for 15 years through PhD program and after. Then I used the lectionary because I was at mainline Protestant churches that did. And it became helpful to have education, spiritual formation things following the church year and the text that then show up in worship. After that, I've spent more time digging into specific areas. I also have developed a new love for the Psalms at night.
Oh, really?
When I put when I do bedtime, I don't have as much religious baggage as my partner. So she's like, I hope you hand off the faith in the joyful way you have it, because God and I aren't always on talking terms. So I'm the normal one for doing the facilitating piety at night. So now it started in lockdown. I got this beautiful translation of the Psalms for Children that Spark House, so it's ELCA, the liberal Lutherans did, and they have probably 60 or so of the Psalms translated in a vocabulary that the children can recognize the words they use for their emotions in it, but also it has all the biblical imagery still. And at night, our 5-year-old and 9-year-old, but I started doing this 3 years ago, they were younger, they would pick the psalm and their art for each one, like very kid art, but which is the one that captures how you're feeling today, and then let's use the words of sacred text to help us narrate our experience of life in the divine story. And these have been handed down before Jesus was around, and these kind of things. Like these are our texts. And so it started doing that with them because of all these feelings they had in lockdown. And we didn't have like the very kind of spiritual technologies to facilitate the invisible reality becoming palpable are really undercut in lockdown. They don't get a giant group of friends where they are affirmed and of their status as the beloved of God, and then encouraged to think through what that means in their level. All these things that churches do beautifully in their best days weren't there. And so it was me. Now I did that, and my wife did that. We're both ordained for years. So trying to figure it out, but the Psalms there became something for them to talk about. Like, I can't sleep, God, what do I do? Right. And those passages where Israel goes, here's my experience. I don't know you. I can't see you. Where are you? Do you listen to me? And then what happens in the Psalms? When I can't hear you, I think of all that you have given me. And it names all of creation, the beautiful things. And then it names the ways God has showed up faithful in the past. And then says, that is who you are. And I trust you hear me. Boom. Or you are the great night light. You are the big, your hand is my big pillow. Like these beautiful little things that then take what was it that Israel had permission to do because they trusted the reality of God, voice all of their experience, and then remind each other that who we are the people that tell these stories. Right, where there was the image of creation, right, like the bird hovering over the water, or the artisan crafting with. All those are in the Psalms. Those kind of images and stuff there with them became ways they got to voice and share their life in lockdown before God with me, and that sent me back to reading them again.
Tripp, what do you do with the Psalms that seem to valorize anger, resentment, retribution with your kids?
Well, I would say the 40% of the Psalms that get in the kids one are not like I'd like to bust that kid's head up, rock them with not drop them in the stones and that kind of thing. But when you don't think that a sacred text is a settled, final, perfect articulation of the perfect life and the account of God, then the fact that we treasure and then say, you will live a more human life if you give yourself permission to say these things and speak these things, that the divine doesn't flinch at our brutal honesty or our anger and all that kind of stuff. It's, to me, part of returning to the text of the Psalms is recognizing how so much of our religious space and institutions want us to mute and cut out sections of real human experience. And those sections weren't cut out or muted in Scripture. So sometimes I have an ally in the psalmist who is as judgmental towards your bigoted backwards neighbor as I am, and they know by the end of the psalm that God still loves them dearly. Or take like the story of Jonah, right? Like the most successful prophet is the one that's pissed he was that successful.
All right. Hey, anyway. Okay. Well, let's go back to that early trip, but quickly move forward. A question about your early years. I know you were interested, influenced by religion, by theology, by your family, by these big questions, et cetera. Were there other influences, or was that kind of it in terms of your own spiritual pilgrimage? How about music? How about friendships? How about the natural world?
Well, the friendship thing, like I just mentioning, like I remember Greta and Elvis. Those were the first African American student and the Jewish student in this small rural elementary school. That the friendship has always played a big role. When I moved to Raleigh, in the capital city for North Carolina, my family were church planting. We were like the first church that met in a movie theater with a rock band for music. And I went to art magnet school. So, you audition for an art, you get in. So from 6th grade through 12th, I did theater for basically after lunch every day through the rest of the school day was theater. So despite being in the South, being a straight, white, Protestant was not normative for most of my biggest friends. So there are plenty of individuals there. My best friend, Raphael, was a devout Jew who he says, Tripp, I know I can't be your favorite, but I can be your second favorite Hebrew. and so that and there were plenty of other Jewish friends in that, obviously in theater, despite I don't think rural North Carolina knew anything other than straight people. In a context of affirmation, lots of people get more honest about themselves. And I had to figure out what to make sense of that. There are also other religious traditions that weren't monotheists there. One of my best friends on the bus was Hindu, and that made absolutely no sense to me at first. And I had all the ideas that like Southern religion tells you, well, they're polytheist, right? And then, now I saw him not too long ago because we moved back to North Carolina, and I was like, oh, no. I actually I think I have like deep metaphysical ties with you, and I'm sitting there explaining life like, you got to understand Whitehead. Listen to this. He's like, yeah, that's how we do things. I was like, have you heard about dual aspect monism? And he's like, yeah, I didn't know that's what it's called, but that's how we see the world.
Okay.
So
in addition to the friendships,
music was as well. I was in musical theater and stuff, and in all that goes into theater department was extremely important. Really, you get at home in your body, in your voice, in working with communities. Like every day for the 3 hours that we do theater, you begin laying on the floor, basically doing contemplative practice. You get over all sorts of stuff. Where you can and can't do and how you have to trust other people. We won all sorts of awards, and many of them were my group of friends. We won twice for like best comedy, one-act comedy, and it was 3 or 4 of us that developed the whole thing in improv, and none of us could have come on it on our own. And yet we won the high school one-act self-written one-act, and then the seniors the year after us, because we all graduated, performed it at the Edinburgh Festival, the Fringe Festival in Edinburgh, because we won for the nation. But that whole creative process, I think you can intuit like why process made perfect sense to me. The way the Bible functioned for my piety was learning to talk to God while wrestling with testimonies from historic people, and then understanding that relational dynamic of the divine in relationship to friends, with the arts. As in the rural areas, I went fishing all the time and lived around nature and in those kind of things. So I would say my formation and such, that kind of relational framework for faith existed from the beginning. It expanded the horizons where I would encounter what I met in Christ. If you're using Christian language.
Just a word about music. Was music important to you? And if so, what music did you listen to and enjoy?
Ooh, yeah. I love music. I love live music and group singing. I will do almost any of them I can do. If you've ever been to big Homebrewed Christianity events, the opening night almost always involves 90s karaoke, because some people with religious trauma don't want to sing religious songs. And then some of them know these ones and don't know these ones. But if you are between 25 and 45, the average age of most people that show up, after 3 beers, everyone can sing Pearl Jam together. And, and what are they anyway? So the music is always there. I was in, all the choirs and stuff at church, in theater and singing. I led music and worship in church, and then in college at campus ministry groups and such. And then I was in rock bands, and we had our Christian version of things and what we played in secular context. But I think in many ways, the disenchantment of modernity has kind of squeezed out all the spaciousness of so many parts of our lives. One of the places that still exists for people that can't figure out how to use the word God in any constructive way, that have, because of the way modernity has structured our lives, we've disengaged ourselves from the natural order and don't think about it, let alone tend to it. We have a kind of attentiveness to the immediate present, needing to accelerate, needing to go faster, more efficient, and all these things that short circuit you from cultivating the kind of attentiveness that poetry and these kinds of things open us up. But one of the few places of like deep seasoned communal transcendence is music. In all sorts of varieties. I think the biggest one left is sports. The problem with sports is it's always tied to some tribal identity, the team, the combative, and this kind of thing. And that, I think that, which I do it. Like, I am the most obnoxiously Laker Dodger fan. So this isn't saying like I don't do that, but it's not as beautiful to me as the first big concert I went to in Los Angeles was U2 at the Rose Bowl. There was every generation, race, religion, all there. And if you've ever seen them live, it's basically structured like a giant mass, and everyone knows all the songs. And then you're sitting there singing it, and you're like, if you weren't there, you wouldn't know that that was possible. And then if you were there, you go, I guess that is possible. And the next day, that's one of the reasons I love music, is it invites us to be honest in some sense. Like, it's solidarity for the immediate and emotive, rather than solidarity on like an idea or a vision and these kind of things. That then the disenchanted logic of modernity starts. We've already internalized how to deconstruct everything. But like when you start singing along with a songwriter that's telling the truth about your life better than you can do right now, then something beautiful happens. Which is, what I was describing earlier. Why I've re-engaged the Psalms is it gave me permission, like as in the middle of my life, at acknowledging a lot of the things I've spent much time hiding and running from. Music can do that. The Psalms did it for me. And not a lot of people, when they meet their therapist in the week, are like, they're going, what are you thinking about? Well, Psalm 87. It's made me think, so anyway.
Yeah, no, I get it. So
what's your favorite album? What's your favorite album, Jay? I love, I'm sorry, I run podcasts too much, so it's hard for me not to ask follow-up questions. But like, if Jay McDaniel got like your 5 best friends and you're going to get pristine brand new album on a record player, everyone has their favorite beverage, you're going to sit around and listen to it. Which album are you going to put on?
I would put on Bob Dylan's Blonde on Blonde.
Ooh.
I would put on the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper. And I might put on Joni Mitchell's Blue. So that's my generation. But I really, really love music, and it's all kinds. And I play in bands also. And I played assisted living centers sing-along music. I do it 3 times a week for folks with dementia. And I play at a little country restaurant. I'll play tonight. We play pop country, Eagles, Beatles, country music. So I'm big on music, and it's interesting to me what you say. I think the same, that music seems to open up a kind of shared humanity. And actually, interestingly, a kind of mysticism. Mm-hmm. If mysticism means awakening to the more emotive sides of life, it takes us into what Whitehead would call subjective forms, moods, emotions, that we might otherwise be unaware of. And it can bring us together, albeit sometimes in tribal ways, because we like our music and we identify with our music. And sometimes we can dismiss other kinds. But no, everything you say makes such sense to me. I have 2 sons younger than I, needless to say, 31 and 34. And so they grew up on rap. Mm-hmm. And they got me interested in rap and hip hop. So you name it, I'm for it. But those are the 3 albums I'd probably take with me to a desert island. I think you're right about the Psalms, too. I just did a Sunday school class last week, an adult Sunday school class on Bob Dylan as a psalmist. And I was making the case that his lyrics actually take us into places all over the place, actually, that we feel and know: tenderness, anger, resentment, hope, fear, depression. It functions psalmically. So I'm just on board with you on all that.
What about Jared? If we were coming over to your house and everything's set up for like friends sharing the experience of an album, what's Jared going to turn on?
I'd probably put on a Sigur Rós record, the Icelandic post-rock band, longtime favorite of mine. More recently, I'm wearing a T-shirt right now, Me Without You.
Oh, yeah.
Love their stuff these past few years.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, and you know what's funny, though, is, right, like you, Jay, like your kids' experience with that kind of music that wasn't yours then made you interested in getting to know it.
Right.
And I'm sitting there going, ooh, when this replays, I'm going to have to write down Icelandic rock band to go check out, right? Because I'm like, oh, I'm interested. Like I know enough of Jared, and we've hung out at the last process event and stuff. I'm like, I'm interested. And then you will listen to those records differently because the person you care about and know, or your friend, is like, this gets at something that I would love for it to share with you that I can't just tell you directly. That, to me, is that kind of relationships making valid an aesthetic experience you would never pick is true. It's also true in food, right? Like when you have a new neighbor or a new friend that has very different spice cabinets than yours, or the lack of spice cabinets after 3 years in Scotland. But both those, I think that the process vision of religious pluralism makes the most sense of that. That's what we would really love to do. I want my process friends that aren't Baptists, that grew up in MySpace and stuff, to be able to listen to how the creative transformation of the divine has been working itself through in my faith and story and my tradition. And then they can listen to it and go, oh, hell yeah, I get that. You make more sense to me. And then I get to be transformed by turning on their record, which I'm not in charge of. The only thing I'm doing right then is listening. But we know it transforms you because these pieces of art capture something that becomes integral to the person, right? Like if y'all came over, I would be like, I want to listen to August and Everything After by Counting Crows, or Audible Sigh and by Vigilantes of Love. And then y'all are gonna be like, listen, I'm not surprised that there's like I'm the perfect age for Counting Crows. And if you're from the South and Americana and alt country became popular, it's not surprising that I'd like to have a favorite one that also uses large amounts of religious imagery in counterintuitive ways and is indie enough I feel hip by mentioning it that you don't know. But when you listen to those, you'll be like, oh, that makes sense. And then you'll be like, wow, Tripp actually repeats a number of those lines and probably thought he thought of them. Anyway, so I think the process relational vision gives us ways, just like appreciating different music that you share with a friend that we learn and grow from. We also learn to do that with wisdom traditions. Or, as I think it was John Tatamanol that used the image, but I've used it so much since then, that one of the gifts of a process vision is that when you encounter a new faith tradition or a new wisdom tradition or a new practice, it's like expanding the spice cabinet of your cooking. Not because you stopped making what your mom and dad made, where you fell in love with a good meal with friends, but because, well, I was missing out until I learned how to make curry in Scotland, because it's literally the only food with flavor in the whole. They have salt and pepper, most of my neighbors, and unless they are they make curry. So like all former colonies of UK, and now I will make it. And when people come over and they talk about Scotland, either I'm a very specific way after going to 10 of the top 20 fish and chips places, and I like them, then ask about the kind of batter, the kind of fish, the temperature, and what they fried it in. Or I got really into curry and wanted to know how to make it. I make different things when friends come over because I was transformed in that. The same thing, like with the example of one of my Hindu friends from high school going back and being like, my bad, you're not a polytheist that hasn't evolved to real religion. In fact, you're the metaphysical intuitions that you were trying to communicate to me, I think I deeply share now. And I'm down for the dual aspect monism of the Vedanta tradition. Like that all those changes and things, like when I think of what you asked, Jay, about your own religious tradition and text and stuff, and then like art and nature and friendship and things, their wisdom traditions at their best teach you what a humble and life-giving hermeneutic is in relationship to your tradition. So you obviously will embody it and pass it on well. But that hermeneutic of the divine, where God is where we live, move, and have our being, is something we can then apply to all encounters with the other, be it aesthetic encounters or physical encounters, and these kinds of things.
Tripp, I've got a friend that plays in my band that doesn't drink, tends to be very optimistic in orientation toward life, doesn't have an easy time talking about tragedy or the dark side of things, but loves to sing the blues and loves to sing country songs about being drunk. Mm-hmm. And I've often said to him, what's going on there? And it made me wonder if sometimes music functions as, I don't know what word to use here, you can help me, a substitute, an opportunity to vicariously experience things that we ourselves can't experience, but somebody can, and music enables us to do that. Well, it's the same as the Psalms in a way, but I guess it's how music...
But it's not the substitute. I wouldn't know if it was like so much as a substitute as the reason blues is powerful isn't because no one else knows how to play 3 chords and repeat the same 6 sentences for 3 minutes. It's because in the simplicity, in the repetition, much more gets itself done, right? And it gives in the rhythmic experience of playing the blues, there is this the attentiveness is different. Similar reggae functions that way. If you just listen to a reggae album, I would be like, oh, I like these few songs or whatever. Then we lived next to a reggae club and I went to see it live enough, and it's a completely different experience when everyone's moving in the same thing. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, they're singing what you, as a religion scholar, think is a really weird way of interpreting passages of the prophets to associate with the figure in Ethiopia, but it's also connected to Black liberationist traditions. And like, you're sitting there, if you were just doing the surface, you'd be like, I don't know. But all of a sudden, like, you realize that they're telling their story deeply also helps you understand places within you where you have internalized the logic of oppression from different cultural, social, institutional masters, and you want liberation and want to seize it. And then you're all in this space, and then we all have different domination systems that we've internalized to repress or squish things out, but that music makes a space for it. In the same way, I think blues makes a space for you acknowledging the deep struggle and pain that's there. There's that a line in James Cone's big book on looking through the spirituals, through blues and jazz and such, and he said that it was the gift of Black music to America was reintroducing the tragedy of life in the context of hope. Right. So because it is all, you're telling the truth when everyone else is nodding, saying, I know what you mean, but you don't know what the blues writer means, not because your baby snuck out the back door to meet another man. But we all know when you feel betrayed, and that deep experience of what I thought was my safe space has been struck. You like these kind of we know that guttural feeling, and then that's the solidarity point. But we don't have words to say the truth about it to most people in our relationships. And when you mentioned the Psalms there, I think the similar thing is true about liturgy. One of the UCC churches I worked at in Los Angeles was the kind that was so progressive they're uncomfortable with the notion of sin. So they changed the confession of sin, and I put it back. And you know what happens? Few people are uncomfortable and they want to have a theological conversation, which it only takes a few months for me being the minister for people to decide whether or not they really want to go have the theological conversation with me. But the funniest part was someone come up and say, oh, Tripp, I have to admit, I didn't like the idea of the confession, but I really, really like it. I had multiple people saying this, and eventually I was interested. Why? So why? What do you like about having it back? I don't think I've heard my husband apologize in years. Is it because if you ask the husband that he thinks he's perfect? No. But what has his mouth not learned how to do? Name it. And how do you learn how to name it in a congregation? Because what happens at the beginning? Someone whose goal is serving the church on God's behalf names the presence of God, thanks God for God's presence, affirms the reality of divine love that was with you as you entered this space and will be with you when you go. And in that context, we get to say this: forgive me, for I have sinned, and name it, from the individual to the systemic. And at the end of it, someone quoting Jesus gets to say your sins are forgiven. Now, whatever you think about it theologically, it was interesting to me because these people were not ones that were interested in the theology. But what happened was the form, be it blues music or a confession, gives you practice at letting you externalize things you don't know how to. And what did the partner hear the other partner doing? Being honest, saying what they knew the other one thought, but they didn't have a context or the language or the ability or a context of grace and affirmation to do it. And so
let me hear you reflect on another kind of music, and let me set the stage for it. I'm going to call it, for lack of a better word, psychedelic music, or shamanic music. That is music that stretches the imagination and takes you into actually a plurality of realms with which you had been unfamiliar. And so early on, I think Dylan's lyrics functioned that way for a good many people. They were so associationist. You didn't understand them. The beauty was you didn't understand them. You could live with them, but you couldn't get a single message or a point. They weren't protest music. They were shamanic music.
Yeah.
What do you think is the role of, I'll call it the polytheistic imagination? That would be another way to put it. It's the imagination that moves beyond preoccupations with unity into an acceptance of plurality as such, without needing to pin it down into a point, including a theological point. What do you think the role of that kind of music is in society today, but also how would you understand that in process terms?
Oh, okay. So here's what comes to mind. You tell me if this is helpful, and we'll see how much Jared has to edit. So those kinds of art pieces, I think their power is the revelation that we have all been subject to the logic of the one, be it in any way, or a kind of concreteness that cuts us off from the fullness of life. If we're thinking in process vocabulary, the place that I first connected these dots and then thought, how do I do those things in a worship context more often, was in Paul Tillich. Now, I was in high school the first time. I asked some question and my dad handed me Paul Tillich sermon books, and then I went through them all and was like, what's next? He's like, well, here's Dynamics of Faith, or, and was kind of going through when my wife and I met at 18, and the first Christmas, she got me first editions of all 3 volumes of it, systematic in the tricolored fold. And I'm like, whoa, what's up, baby? And one of the big things in Paul Tillich's ongoing reflection about idolatry, when he thinks about it philosophically, is he says that God, or the unconditioned, is like the source of all things, and it can claim any contingent reality can become a symbol or an event or a breakthrough or an encounter with the divine. Now, one of the problems with theology is that it is always a second order discourse, reflection on the dynamic relationship of symbols for the life of a community. Symbols can come and go and die and such, and all this kind of thing. But if you take the notion that a lot of things, because they're trusted, because there's wisdom in it, there's a set, and or you think of even in set theory, like there's a bunch of contingent particulars that are bound up, and then once the brackets go around it, it now acts like it's just one variable, when it's really right. Like if we know the history of Christianity, you tell me what the narrative is Well, I know if you were in Alexandria in the early church, the problem is that you don't lack orienting yourself pedagogically towards the ultimate. But if you went down to Antioch, they're going to frame it differently. And Tertullian's going to complain about both of those options until he meets a female with the Holy Ghost. And then we don't know what he thinks because it was so heretical, no one kept any of it, right? But all of those visions would take the narrative of Israel and life of the church and their philosophical ideas, and they call it the truth or the one, the logic or the gospel or whatever. Now on a street corner, we have 50 versions of those, right? And so the liberating part, I think, of those psychedelic types of experiences, or the breakthrough or the event of revelation outside the one, is that once you reveal something outside the set, it does two things. One, it tells you there is something more than the one. But the other thing is, it says that the power of the one is not that it's singular. It's actually the dynamic relationship of all these particulars and the way it functions. So like once something outside the set, that's all these contingents that are bottled up as a singular truth, when that becomes an event of the divine, then the contingency and particularity of everything in the one is revealed. If it is idolatrous, it resists that recognition and wants to erase, silence, kill, call heretical, anything that reveals the contingency of the big story that is being shared. But if those that are in that tradition don't recognize it, don't have a kind of authoritarian understanding of it, then that revelation is an invitation of difference that can be engaged, that can be transformed. If you took that second order theological discourse and then did all of our biographies, there would be like the version of Tripp he had growing up. And then there are these friends and he has to make sense of it. Does he either judge them, condemn them, hide from them or whatever, or does his account of reality have to start including this? And how do you include it? And then the vision starts to grow and it changes, and it grows and it changes because you recognize the flow of life in relationship to divine. It is always growing, evolving, and changing. So you don't need to spend your energy doing a cover up that it happens to be a set of contingent things. Because why? Because the unconditioned is connected to all of it. The question is, in what ways does it grab and seize you?
Let's go there.
But does that make sense? Why those?
Yeah, no, it's great.
You know, if you listen to your favorite album and you have a long relationship with it, and then Jared and I are like, oh, I know those 3 songs off Blonde on Blonde that are on the Greatest Hits album our parents had in the car. Then we hear these other songs, you're like, oh, that's wild. I didn't know about that.
Well, I confess I'm trapped within many logics of the one, because I think that what I like is there's a tendency. Now, this is true, and this is normative, and everybody ought to like this. They don't see it, but I want to take this in a direction. I want to talk about God. It's easy for people to think that God names an ultimate source, a something of which all things are manifestations or emanations. That's the Neoplatonic perspective. But you see it, I see it, even in Tillich. God is the ground of being, not a being among beings, but the ground of being. And an interesting feature of Whitehead's thought is that for him, God is not exactly the ground of being. He names the ultimate creativity.
Right.
And he says a whole lot of things about it, and it's not all consistent. But he's pretty clear that both God and the world, and he says this, are in the grip of something more. And he uses that phrase, in the grip of something more, of a creativity. And in dialogue with Buddhists, that's rung true. Amida Buddha is not the Dharmakaya. The Dharmakaya is this fathomless something, neither good nor evil, without preferences. But then there is, in addition, Amida Buddha. And John Cobb says what Pure Land Buddhists mean by Amida is kind of like what Whitehead meant by God, not the ultimate reality, but in a way, yes, a being among beings, yes, albeit everywhere and markedly different and everlasting, etc. What do you make of that? Does that challenge you, or can you link that with what you said 5 minutes ago about the logic of the one?
Oh, yeah. So now the reason the logic of the one and the conditioned unconditioned thing was helpful is like that was the person I was wrestling with when I first had those questions, right? And there are other questions where the person I wrestled with when I had them was reading process thought. So the like when you ask a question in the biographical frame, it's like, who did I talk this out with? I would say, just for people that are interested in Tillich, in volume 3 of his systematic, I think he breaks rank on his own ontology.
Really?
And the spirit of life and these kinds of things have causal traction with reality in ways that his ontology doesn't allow if it's internally consistent. But I was told I wasn't internally consistent in an article, so this isn't a diss. Just I think that challenge is there in all philosophical theologies that are trying to, one, if you're Christian in some way, talk about how ultimate actuality, if you're thinking process, was present in some unique, distinctive, transformative way in Christ, in the person of Jesus and the Christ event and the structure of Christian existence that flows out of it and such. And that dynamic of the one and the many increasing by one, that is the dynamic where that's taking place. But if you imagine that and you're thinking about God, then there's some vision of the divine that is not a metaphysical exception. You can't just imagine that dynamic, living, covenanting image if you use Hebrew scriptures, or incarnating image if you're thinking of the Christ. Like, those things could be revelatory of reality, but they are not a forsaking of the rest of reality. Now, that picture of dynamic relationality is something you are going to have to use when reflecting about other wisdom traditions, I think, especially in a kind of post-Christendom context, culture, and this is something Tillich made a big deal of, is like, Christendom used to be culture. It's not anymore, but humans still ask these same big questions over and over in each and every context. And this is something in David Bentley Hart's book on the experience of God. I think he gets that really well, right? It is that there is the wisdom traditions are stuck trying to ask, how does the shared solidarity of all finite things connect with the valuation of flourishing and non-flourishing, good, true, beautiful, all these dynamics. Like, for Whitehead, it's like the forms and the aim and the response of the individual, but the valuation in some sense, and the recognition that you do not have it in and of yourself to access the big, pure, accurate vision. Religious traditions are stuck in this dynamic of like shared solidarity, source, and the dynamic of valuation in some way. Wisdom traditions give you different tools and insights, or spiritual technologies or whatever, for getting at it. And more is always getting itself done in those traditions than the practitioners know. I know it's true about me. I keep discovering new things and look back and go, I could judge former Tripp because he got really into being a Calvinist at one point, and that was stupid. Or I go, well, the living and life-giving God's been a part of my whole story this whole time, and I should probably love that previous version of me that shows up in this moment just as much as my neighbor or my enemy. And so to me, there's this, like, these different kinds of questions as a philosopher of religion we have to make sense of, and those things get expressed differently in different religious traditions. And so I think, at least for me vocationally, as a theologian of the church, is how do I interpret and hand on the faith in the most beautiful and compelling way I can to those I interact with? And then how does that account of the world does it facilitate me appreciating and celebrating beauty in other traditions? Specifically, if you're taking creativity, God, world, forms, we have process friends that, if they're uncomfortable with the distinction of creativity and God, use the Godhead and the Trinity to there are all different ways of doing it. I tend to think, because the phenomenology of process is really compelling to me, I find it weird how theologians lose their biscuits talking about how things began or how things end, when our access to those are minimal at best, but we do have access of what it's like to experience and then experience again. And so I try to work out theologically. So I have a version of like every atonement theory I could muster if I need to have that one. I can argue for creation out of nothing, or it's dumb. And I have my own preference, but think of the podcast, Homebrewed Christianity. I have my preference, and people can figure it out after 1,500 episodes. But I think there are beautiful expressions of different parts of this tradition that we cut ourselves off from so often. So I feel my goal is always, let me find the beautiful expressions of all these different parts. I'm not going to become a Reformed theologian.
Back to you, Tripp. You're a father of two. Three. Yep. And remind me, what are their names?
Elgin is 15, Cora is 9, and Haven is 5.
So if your children come to you and say, Dad, when I pray, do you think someone's listening? How would you answer in terms they would understand?
Well, it really depends on which one.
Okay, choose one.
Okay, my oldest is the one that probably has my intense piety the most. We've had trouble finding a church we can all be at in Greensboro, and it really frustrates him because he really likes being involved. He snuck to Baptist. We don't do infant baptism, so I had told him he had to be like an adult, teenager at least. And when he was 11, he snuck to the baptism classes at the church we were going to, so he could get baptized. And I found out afterwards, and I'm like, well, yeah, that's not coercion. Because some Baptists are like, they got the age of accountability. The 7-year-old finally understands what it's like to die to their old self and rise to a new one and give allegiance to the way of Jesus in their life. And you're like, really? So he's his own thing.
So no, but he asked you that question, Dad, when I pray, do you think someone's listening? In other words, do you imagine God as in some way a being who feels, who hears, who responds to prayer? And I'm really focusing not on the efficacy of intercessory prayer. That's not the issue. It's the understanding of God. Is God personal and different from me?
Yeah.
And so how would you answer him there?
Yes. I'll just say yes. I mean, if he wants a long explanation, but I mean, John Cobb's criticism of liberal Protestants, I think, is really accurate, that they gave so much authority to modernity's vision of the world that they have forsaken the very piety that Jesus passed on to his followers. What are the few things he told us to do? When you pray this way, our Father, right? You see the emphasis of Abba intimacy running through John's work. That was why he became my favorite theologian when I was in my early 20s, because I'm just like, yeah, that's right. Why can I? But are you surprised that the guy that the Methodist missionary kid who grew up in Japan understands in a process vision the faith in a way that the Baptist preacher kid, that even when I didn't know if I believed in God, I still read the Bible and prayed every day? How do you go to bed without it? So for him, I think the structure of Christian existence involves saying something like, the source of all things knows your name, knows your face, and cares. The most true thing about you that you encounter each moment when you attune yourself to the divine is that you are the beloved of God, and that is true of you, your neighbor, creation, and your enemy. To internalize the affirmation of the divine is expressed in that same loving solidarity to the other. The life and gift of the gospel is that this God has not forsaken you even unto death. And whether your own agency leads you to Sheol, far away from the presence of God, or in rapturous bliss that very next moment, the love of God revealed in Jesus the Christ meets you. I nuanced it in just enough way you can guess how the process person sees it. But I don't think talking about prehension will communicate to one of my children what the subjective of God is ultimately telling to me at the end of part 5 in Process and Reality.
No, I don't think that'll work either. I don't recommend it.
But here's an example though with Cora. Like, she's 9, right? I mean, you can guess Cora is not an arbitrary name here. It starts in Plato's Timaeus dialogue. It is the concept, that which all things participate in and nothing particularizes, which is ultimately creativity in Whitehead. Derrida, the Cora is the play of difference, not the difference. Oh, it's so good. But anyway, Heidegger plays with it. You can see this whole trajectory of this concept through the Neoplatonists on Tripp's more mystical days, and then through the postmodern deconstructionists, but also the Cappadocians. What was the Cora when they're trying to the receptacle of existence? The Cora, Basil says, was what was in the cup at the table. This is my body. This is my blood. That is the Cora. And that is the divine life that we are being given and woven into. And so when Cora are talking about this, I said, you know why I named you Cora? Because I tell, a 9-year-old version of that. And she goes, well, what does that mean? I said, in the early church, when they were trying to understand how God was present in this person who embodied the love of God, but also that God is the source of all things. So when we have the Eucharist, that we are sharing in the dancing love of God. And I said, so when I say your name, I'm saying you are the joyous dancing of God. And that's true on days you know it and days you don't. And
so that just Cora imagine God as a companion. I'm using John Cobb's language there, an Abba, an eternal companion, who in some way feels our feelings. And as you say, everybody's feelings and cares about everyone. But it's the image of God as eternal companion, different from me, from us, but nonetheless receptive of us in a loving way. That's what I mean by the God who listens. And that's John Cobb's, that's one of his deepest feelings. It's not so much God as lure. It's God as companion. And I think that was what was most important to Whitehead. Not the initial aim is actually pretty rare in process and reality. Christians weave it into this fundamental reality, but Whitehead had a sense that there's something that responds in a sympathetic way to everything that happens. Would Cora, do you think she understands God that way too?
Yeah, I think so. But she also uses the language and imagery and things that she gets from her family. Since 5, she was in mostly lockdown, and then we moved and we've visited random churches. So then most of her religious experience, language, reflection has been with me. And I put it this way: if religion is mostly only the things Immanuel Kant allows, like organizing around morality and such and things, and then wisdom traditions are good for that, but not necessary. And the results of religious traditions that are very good at communicating the moral vision of Jesus are the worst at handing on the faith in ways that actually inspire actual giving and actual use of your time for your neighbor, right? Like the people whose God is the biggest asshole actually give more money and time. So, and if you ask them why, part of it might be they're scared, but if you actually know them, and I've had them as my congregants, they're there because they have encountered love, and this is what it's like. What do? You share it. And so in some sense, I emphasize those things because of it's important to me. Also, I'm sure you've had this experience, like, everyone knows death, but you don't know it until you have your kid. That is a time death becomes real in a different way. And so what is it that I hope my children, what is the wisdom I can give them that I hope stays with them, even if they don't agree with it all the time or whatever? But when they think of what mom and I give them, what are the things that are there? We came up with, and it's an ever-growing list. They don't know this, but Fuller family truths. And they get them at different points when they start to ask good questions and things where, like, here's a statement. And the meaning of it grows as you get older. But like in the first one is the most true thing about you is you're God's beloved, right? And when Haven was 4, we told him. And the other 2 were there, siblings, and they knew it. What is the first Fuller family truth? The most true thing about you is you're God's beloved. And what does that mean? That personal bit is really important. There'll be times I tell you you weren't good enough, Cora, or you should have been more lovely, or your teacher judges you, or your friends do, and all these kinds of things. And then sometimes you'll look in the mirror and you'll do it to yourself, or you'll look at your past and regret it. And I just want you to know, anytime someone says you're less than lovely and loved by the divine, they have a conflict with the truth of God for you. the most true, and it's above my pay grade to tell her that she's worth less than God has. And I think that is me trying to capture the heart of the piety of Jesus. It was practiced in how he taught us to pray, and how he mocked people that were worried about what you could do on a Sabbath or if he could forgive sin. The authority of Jesus, when he occupies it in transgressive ways in this historical context, where he transgressed to say that the sinner or the hurting or the excluded were the beloved of God, and you do not use Sabbath law or morality to cut them off from that affirmation. And I think that's true. And if it's not, it should be. And so that's there, right? But then they get to treat others as you want to be treated. Then you get to like our oldest, when he turned 15, I gave him a pen of, my second favorite sacred text is Lord of the Rings, of the Mines of Moria, right? And this is entering a destroyed dwarven stronghold, but it in Elvish over it, because they had an ongoing conflict, elves and dwarves. It says, speak, friend, and enter. Then you speak it in Elvish, and then the door to the dwarves open. And I said, the greatest gift in life, this is, I guess, rule 6, the greatest gift in life is friendship. And I want you to know, Elgin, that Mom and I are committed to supporting and encouraging you so that we end up just being friends. And this pin's on here because you're 15 now. And whenever you need to have a conversation with Dad, you can have it. But you now have permission to tell Mom and I want to talk to my friend, Tripp, or my friend.
That's great.
And that is how we promise to relate to you in those moments. But that's why my favorite verse in the whole freaking Bible, you want to guess what it is? I no longer call you servants, I call you friends.
That's wonderful.
So, and then if you said, Tripp, explain it in process, then I would. And I would go to those very things, the whole feeling with and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And God's valuation for the world isn't some abstract thing that's set up eternal and ever. It's actually contextualized, having experienced all of existence and each moment of your life to that moment. And there, based on what's actually possible in front of you, the horizon of possibility, God gives the gift of divine valuation to you. And then we'll do it in the next, regardless of what happened. And what is that invitation? That when you start to internalize the reciprocity of responding to the divine, you actually make material the divine insistence. You actually start to create habits and are formed by the wisdom of divine love and context. And that creates more space, more possibility for the next moment. And that gets to the place, right, where the proper response, success as a parent is, you're no longer my kid, you're my friend. Or you're no longer the dumb disciple that doesn't get what I'm doing, you're my friend. Or feed my sheep. Or let the same mind be in all of you that was in Christ Jesus. Or that the sin, law, and death have become subject to the Son. Why? So that all things can come to participate in the divine life. There's this, the picture of divine participation in Scripture starts with these strangers becoming a community that are then empowered friends to invite people to participate in the kingdom of God. In the life, in the letters of Paul, you see these churches or outposts, alternative communities where the mind of Christ that did not count equality with God something to be grasped shapes those people and encounters the other and helps their communities. These kinds of participatory growing images mean that when there's this reciprocity of internalizing the divine valuation, your agency and freedom goes up. But it is a freedom to actually participate with the divine grain and call of the universe, not a kind of freedom for the modern individual that demands rights from everything around you and this kind of thing. In that you can see it, the shift from servant to friend, from follower to leader, from I called you to I empowered you, right? In the Synoptics, he sends out the 12, and then in Luke, he sends out the 70 to do what? The very same things Jesus came to do. He wasn't this like breakthrough into the world where it fixes everything and you can cling on as he pieces out. It was an eruption of the Spirit of God wrestling in the life of Israel all the way into Mary and Jesus and the disciples of this community, and you get to be a part of it. And when you do, what happens? you're recognized as friends of God. Why? Because what do you do with your authority and your faith? You transgress boundaries that don't recognize the belovedness of your neighbor and your enemy. You transgress the expectations of institutions and societies that say that other human beings aren't valuable. You recognize the way you're connected to people that are destroying others and our non-creaturely neighbors. Like, to me, that big movement, like him becoming my friend and all my kids hopefully doing it, is really like, what did success look like for Jesus? That the people of God participate in the mind of Christ. And so these kind of the larger process vision really has shaped how I think about succeeding in whatever, being faithful as a parent. It did so as a minister. And I don't know, officially when the metaphysical traction of my vision or the theological poetics disappear into just adiaphora and speculation upon speculation. But I think that one of the things that the process vision helps with, it is just important for your life to be grounded in reality as it is to be seized romantically and erotically by the possibility of what it could be.
Yeah, I agree.
Too often we inflate the poetics of transcendence on like these, like we're squishing.
Well, I think we can overemphasize adventure and underemphasize friendship. And so I want to be friends with people now, wherever they are. I'm your friend, and that's very important. There also needs to be a sense of adventure, a fresh possibility, of excitement, that kind of thing. But that's really not enough. And so I really like your theme of friendship. I've never thought of the ministry of Jesus as, among other things, centered in the possibility of friendship, and in a way setting a wildfire of friendships, a tsunami of friendships. That's what it's about. Let's share this possibility of friendship. And it's interesting to think about that. I mean, I'm all about human-to-human friendships. It's also interesting to think about that in relation to the more than human world, what that can mean. Friends with the earth. I didn't invent that phrase, as you know, but to think about what that really means. And for that matter, friendship with animals. What does that really mean? Here we go. But Tripp, you're so good, and your thoughts are so rich and inviting and exciting. And it's been great today to get to hear you. And I wish we could go another hour. I don't think we can, because Jared's got to edit this thing. And if he has too much to edit, it will never get edited.
Well, so I want you to know, I absolutely love you as a public scholar. I think that your time, attention, and then responsiveness to people over time at trying to communicate the process vision in ways that celebrate the different ways it's expressed in different religious traditions, different arts and stuff, but also that you model what it's like to charitably connect the dots between cultures of transcendence that are too often siloed. And you do it by, like, you don't bear false witness. And sometimes you respond to those of us in the process community that are overzealous to make connections, to like preserve the difference that's there. And other times you reframe things that are cherished at different parts of life, that with the larger process framework, we see elements of solidarity and connection that we don't. I mean, I'd always followed you online and liked you and that kind of thing. But when you and John and I did the class in Canada together, and listening to how you took so seriously the task of teaching, and how your students and your kids and your neighbors and the individuals you spend time with singing each week, that you took their lives and experiences so seriously that they retaught you how to do what you were trained to do. I think that is it was so beautiful to me and compelling that it made me not want to miss when you publish things. And I'm always excited to see you. It's one of the reasons I love this podcast. And I have been interviewed, I don't know, 40 or 50 times. And most of these questions are not ones I've been asked before. And so I was super pumped.
let me say, and this is true. I want to be a friend of Jesus, the way you describe that friendship. I want to walk in his footsteps as you present it. And I feel, despite my no boundaries openness and let there be plurality and reframe things, I'm a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And my understanding of Christianity is to share in the journey of Jesus as best I can.
Do you remember
and feel
that?
the presence of Jesus's Abba as best I can. And you give me new eyes for what that means. That means sharing the good news of friendship as a genuine possibility for us. So I'm really grateful to you. And I think you're brilliant besides. So, you've got that deep insight and you've got that remarkable intellect and imagination. So I do hope that this is one of the few occasions that you've gotten to talk about music. And maybe not. Maybe you get to theologize about music all the time. But I really liked that part of our conversation. Well, for Jared's sake, let's close this off. All right.
Thank you, Jared.
Take care.
Yeah, no problem.
Conversations in Process is a podcast from Open Horizons and the Cobb Institute, hosted by Jay McDaniel. If you enjoy these conversations and would like to support the show, consider becoming a friend of the Cobb Institute or making a donation at cobb.institute. Or leave a review through Apple Podcasts to help others find out about the show. Thank you for listening.